Okay, welcome to the latest episode of Tech and Learning Conversations. My name is Kevin Hogan, and I'm glad you found us. Today, we're talking about one of the oldest conundrums in education, and that is trying to develop interventions for struggling readers, particularly those in the upper elementary and middle school, kids who have been struggling so long with just getting their foundation skills together that they continue to find themselves falling behind year after year. I'm joined today with Allison Zimmermann. She's the CEO of Foundations in Learning, and Dr. Seth King. He's the Associate Professor of Special Education at the University of Iowa, to talk about the strategies that they are putting together. Specifically, an almost $10 million grant from the Department of Education, remember that, who have been charged with the idea, along with Wyoming State, putting together a 5-year study that looks to bring in intervention that has already shown promise to 80 to 100 schools across Wyoming. I think while this is specific to this program in Wyoming, I believe the applications, and when you listen, you'll get it. These lessons can be applied anywhere, and not necessarily just because it's a rural situation versus an in-school thing. They're testing models that could solve a challenge that doesn't get discussed enough. How do you provide intensive literary support to areas that don't have enough certified specialists on staff? Now, yes, that is certainly a problem in rural areas of this country. It's also a problem in urban areas as well, that shortage. So what I found fascinating is their honest discussion about tier 1 versus tier 2 interventions. As Allie puts it, we had to stop the bleeding for those older students that are still struggling with foundational skills. We can't just tell them to wait while they fix the core instruction. So let's dive in. Okay, Allie, Seth, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Kevin.
And I guess we can just jump right into the news.
Okay.
A recent $9.99 million research grant to help the students in the state of Wyoming. Maybe, Allie, you can start us off. Talk about the genesis of this and where it came from and what the path it took to get to this point.
Yeah, so we've had a longstanding relationship with the University of Iowa and the Iowa Reading Research Center, which Seth is a part of. And WordFlight, in part, was built out of research and partnership there. But when this opportunity came up for the EIR grant, we partnered together. And then we started saying, where can we make a great impact, and which states do we have relationships with? And we had the opportunity to work with Dr. Claudia Ladd in Wyoming, who leads literacy for the state. And to say it was a very fast process. The call for proposals came out. We had about a month to submit. Mm-hmm. And in that timeline, we got very close, the 3 sort of entities coming together to apply and put forward a strong enough application that we're able to be awarded that grant. And I should say that on our end, Dr. Carolyn Brown on our team is our co-founder and chief academic officer and is leading this work with Seth. I get to be involved, but she is driving the research side for us. And so she, Seth, and Claudia will get to work really closely on this going forward.
Yeah, Seth, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the relationship and the kind of the structure of how this is set up for our readers and our listeners who might be working in districts who want to look at a program such as this.
Sure. So really, if you think about it, I'm going to go back to the application, because I think that when you think about what they wanted, it makes what we're doing make a lot more sense. And so what they want to do is they want to take an intervention that already has some evidence to suggest that it might work. And then they want to apply that at a much wider scale. And so Foundations in Learning, I've worked with them before. And one of the things that they do is they're very interested in seeing that their intervention works. So they had already conducted a really high quality study. And so we had to provide evidence of that. But we also had to provide evidence of two things. One, we had to sort of show that a state was sort of willing to assist in this large-scale evaluation. And we also needed to suggest that we had sort of the ability to really conduct a large-scale evaluation. And so when you think about all of those pieces, that you're going to need a state cooperating, that you're going to have some experience in research, and then finally, that you're going to have an intervention that already has some evidence to suggest that it might be effective. That's how all of this came together. So we have the state of Wyoming, we have the Iowa Reading Research Center, who is going to assist in sort of recruiting in Iowa, as well as conducting the research. And then you have Foundations and Learning and their intervention that they've developed.
Yeah, and don't forget about the CEA. So we've also partnered with the CEA at Iowa, which will be conducting the evaluation, and Liz Hollingworth leads that work for us. Mm-hmm. So it's actually, while the day-to-day work for the next 5 years will be these three entities, us, Seth's team, and Wyoming, then there's an evaluation team also looking at this. And from our perspective, it's awesome. We had an RCT that was very successful. Seth mentioned a random control trial that we ran with middle school students. And we showed that the intervention was extremely successful in moving those students on their foundational skills and those skills that they needed for fluency. This is now an opportunity for us to do the same, but for students in 3rd through 5th grade to start. So we're going to be confirming what we already know, because we're working with hundreds of schools across the country and tens of thousands of students. We know that it works in those grades, but now we will have this really robust evidence and study coming out of this work that shows that. And it will also help us to develop what are the best implementation models, the most cost-effective, the most efficient, so that we can do this work at scale and change reading outcomes across the country, just like we plan to in Wyoming.
Yeah, the scale aspect of it is really interesting to me. You know, we have 15,000 different school districts in the United States of all various sizes. And I was kind of interested too in the rural aspect of this with Wyoming. Is there a distinction here with this work versus, say, I don't know, the New York City school system in terms of the use and the application of the product and service?
Go ahead, Seth, and then I can follow.
Sure. So I know a little bit about Wyoming, and what I do know is that every school district there is really different. So they are unique in that among states, in that most school districts, when they do special education services, for example, they don't get enough federal money to actually provide the programs. They get that from, the state has to sort of step in. Wyoming, actually, their districts have a surplus. So their districts really get to call a lot of the shots in what their education looks like versus a lot of other states. And so in that sense, they have a unique character. They are dedicated really to sort of serving the students' needs as they see them. And also they are, it is a small town, a lot of small towns separated by a lot of roads. Very long roads. So there are challenges there and also opportunities in terms of school districts really buying into this intervention, but also just a lot of different populations and so forth. It's hard to provide services for certain districts in Wyoming because you're talking about a lot of windshield time that you're not necessarily going to have in a lot of other states.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're doing in the first few years is building the capacity with the teachers. So there's, in this grant, one of the big components, and Seth touched on it earlier, is training and support and professional learning for the teachers to be successful. And we'll do some of that in person and some of that virtually. But in rural states, one of the challenges is hiring staff into each of those districts that are certified to provide services like Seth was talking about, or just that to have enough to serve all the different needs that students have that maybe aren't identified with an IEP or a disability. So in that sense, staffing is a totally different challenge in a place like Wyoming or even in Iowa in rural parts than it is in New York City, where you've got density, right? And so this will help to provide models for that. But then in our last 2 years of the grant, and I don't think that the press release touches on this too much, we'll be actually testing out a model of virtual tutoring for rural students too. So if for students who need more intensive intervention, then they may have the staff to provide at the middle school level, right? So in that 6th, 7th, 8th grade, where they really, if they're not fluent yet, fluent readers, they're going to need more.
Yeah.
So we will be testing out a model for that virtual tutoring that we already do directly to parents, but haven't done in school settings. And so there's sort of two parts of this grant. The first is we're confirming how well the intervention works in that elementary age group and really making fluency gains there. And then the second part is testing out this new model that can really support rural schools that might not have the resources on site to provide the services that students need.
So walk us through what this feels like with the boots on the ground, the day-to-day. We're kind of talking conceptually here, but what does this mean actually in the classroom? It just kind of walk us through from, I guess, there must be an assessment aspect of it at first, right?
Yep. Yeah. So there's what we do in word flight, and then there's the grant overlay around that in terms of the additional support and testing that's going to happen as part of the grant. And so at the beginning of the school year, any word flight user takes our diagnostic assessment, and that's going to set their personalized curriculum in our intervention. And then teachers can use that to help group students and provide that small group support that students need depending on sort of their variety of levels of need. And then at the same time as we're doing the word flight assessment, very close to that time, the University of Iowa will be doing assessments so that we're measuring not just in our assessment, which has been patented and validated already, but that we have an outside validation again for this work. Seth, do you want to talk about that side too?
Sure. And so I think there are almost two questions here. One is what happens in word flight, and that's going to be Allie's department. And the other is what's going to happen in this study. And so I'm going to speak to the study. And so it happens over 5 years. And what we want to do is we want to give, in order to sort of compare and see if this is effective, we're going to recruit from between 80 to 100 different schools. And in the first year of the project, about half of those schools are going to use word flight, and the other half of them are not going to be using word flight. Now, we're doing something, the entire school gets it, and whether or not your school is using word flight in year one or not, we provide a stipend for the schools for cooperating for us. Now, what we add on top of the word flight, because word flight has its own assessments, but in order for us to evaluate whether or not it's effective, we're going to use different measures that are not directly aligned with the curriculum. So because if word flight is effective, we should see this move the needle, right? After the first year, everybody goes on word flight. So this is sort of what's called a waitlisted design. So every school that we work with will get word flight for free for at least, I believe, 2 years, because after the first year, we're going to watch them again for a year, and then we're going to see how well the schools implement it, what challenges emerge, whether it's sustainable sort of in the long term. And so it's a really good opportunity both to see if it works, but also a good opportunity for schools to use something with a lot of promise and get used to it, because everybody who's involved with it gets access to this intervention.
Yeah. Yep. And in terms of that sustainability, what we've seen so far in schools is that it is, right? And this will give us another set of data points. When a student is put into the word flight intervention, we see 60 to 80 minutes from them online in their personalized program. And that's supplemented then by teacher-delivered instruction for anywhere from 2 to 5 days a week, depending on what their needs might be. And those small group lessons could be 10 or 20 minutes. Right. So when we think about how this fits into the school day, we're talking about 20 to 30 minutes a day of intervention time. And what we see is over a school year, about 85% of students make gains on those foundational skills, and they actually get to proficiency in one school year. And that's at a middle school level. Even high school students are falling into that data. So what we're going to try to see here is what percentage of students are becoming proficient in their decoding skills and their automatic word recognition skills and improving their fluency skills. And so we have some of those measures inside WordFlight and some of those measures that we're going to be doing outside of WordFlight with the evaluation. And then ultimately, our goal is to move students' reading abilities, right? We want them reading and enjoying reading and building their confidence in reading. And that should also translate to the state tests that they are taking at the end of the year too. So it should flow into their day and into their schedule in a way that's really doable for them. But we are providing those stipends. We're grant funding the intervention for them so that schools also have additional resources to participate, because there is going to be requirements on reporting and us being in the building testing and doing sort of those things that can be disruptive at certain times of the year.
Yeah, and it seems that there is a real challenge here. I mean, this is a top-down implementation, right? Versus kind of a bottoms-up, where it's talking about the entire state. And,
Yeah.
Any recommendations for our readers, for our listeners here, on if they're just a reading teacher or they're a principal or a district administrator, and they want to do something like this, maybe, but at a smaller scale? What are the first steps that they should begin to take, or how to look at this situation holistically?
I can do this, Allie, or it's up to you. I'll talk. I'll start talking, and I'm sure that Allie will actually provide something that you'll end up keeping. What I would recommend, first of all, is that I would call WordFlight more of what is known as sort of a tier 2 intervention. And so what that means is that essentially you have students who have gone through instruction that everyone gets, and we're still seeing that they could use additional reading support. What I would recommend, first of all, though, is if you are a school, is really thinking about what is happening at that tier 1 level, which is the instruction everybody gets, and just making sure that that instruction is really consistent with what we know works for most learners. I think that's where you can start. And then when you start thinking about tier 2, which is roughly 15% of students in your school on average, it's not always that. When we start thinking about that little something extra, then we can start thinking about more systematic programs, maybe we're getting something specific like WordFlight or a similar product that has evidence for its effectiveness. When you're thinking about what you want to do in that universal instructional level, I think there's a lot of stuff out there, and I would, just to plug it, I think that you could start with the Iowa Reading Research Center. So they have a lot of resources that you could use and a lot of recommendations for that general instruction.
Yeah, I think starting with centers like Iowa's is a great place to go. You're going to get evidence-based support and all of the sort of the frameworks that you need to be thinking about this type of work.
Yeah.
I would take issue with one small thing that Seth said, which is we got to solve the tier 1, the core first, which I think is true. But when we're talking about students in 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th or all the way through high school, right? These students who have been struggling for so long with these foundational reading skills, we actually have to look at what are we going to do for them now? Because we have to stop the bleeding, right? We have to give them the foundation that they need to be successful with that core as well. And so I would say you're looking for looking at your data, you're looking at your screening data, you can use the WordFlight screener as a free assessment on our website they can use, but there's lots of others that schools are required to use in many states that you can use. But look at that data, see where the challenges are. If your data doesn't tell you about foundational skills, it stopped doing that when they left elementary school, reach out to a program like us where we do measure it even up through those upper grades, and we can help you understand the problem. But the thing I heard in your question, Kevin, was what if you wanted to try something and do your own sort of, um, not just sort of understand what do I do in terms of solving my kids not reading, but if I want to be a part of a study like this, or if I want to pilot something and see if it works for my kids, I would say that word flight and a lot of other really high quality interventions will pilot with you, right? So if you want to run a mini study in your school and say, I'm going to take this classroom and we're going to try this, and I'm going to do this classroom and we're going to do business as usual, and we're going to see at the end of the school year if this intervention was working in our setting. If we used with Fidelity, there's lots of things in there that we'd want to make sure was happening, but we partner with schools to do that on a regular basis. And we offer a grant program to schools internally from us in order to do that for a semester. So there are different ways that schools can think about this, right? And asking to try something out, understanding if it fits not just the needs your students have, but how it fits in your day, how it fits into the structure of your school. These are all big picture questions that you can either answer beforehand or in partnership with an organization like us.
That's some really great advice and some great insights here. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Congratulations on your work. It's hugely important, not only for the state of Wyoming, but for kids all around. So thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thanks to Allie and Seth for breaking down what could have been a very academic and dry conversation into something that's, I think, really practical and actionable, and I hope you feel the same way. What strikes me most is the thoughtfulness behind the study design. They've already done the groundwork with a successful trial, and now they're scaling up with testing a virtual tutoring model that could solve real staffing problems for rural districts and urban districts alike. And really, I think it is that idea of scale, which is because this is a national problem and it needs national solutions. So once again, thanks for listening to Tech and Learning Conversations. Subscribe and share this episode with colleagues working on literary intervention or your principals or other administrators who you think might find this valuable. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions about what actually works for your kids. Thanks.